spark revolutions, and paint vivid pictures of the times we live in. There are the threads that weave the fabric of our societies, capturing both the subtle shifts and seismic changes around us. And what better place to explore this symphony of words and ideas than right here at the 6th edition of Orange City Literature Festival. A very warm and thoughtful morning to all of you. I'm Alok Joshi, and it is my honor to welcome you to this prestigious festival organized by SGR Knowledge Foundation, powered by Raisoni Education. Our session today dwells into the topic that lies at the heart of the societal transformation, the political landscape as defined by political shifts and public sentiments. In the world where change is the only constant, politics remains a mirror reflecting public emotions, aspirations, and actions. This discussion promises to ravel the intricate dynamics of power, perception, and policies that shape our present and future. Please allow me the pleasure of introducing the distinguished speakers who will bring this subject to life. Mr. Arun Anand is an author, columnist, and broadcaster. He has 3 decades of experience in journalism. Mr. Arun Anand has authored more than a dozen of books covering RSS, geopolitics, Islamic radicalization, and the forgotten history of India. Currently, he is counseling editor at Network 18. He writes extensively on RSS and geopolitics. His forthcoming book is on Hindu nationalism. He is founder editor of 2 research websites, thenationalistview.com and rssfact.org, and a YouTube channel, The Nationalist View. Mr. Naveen Choudhary, a celebrated writer whose novels Janta Store and Dhai Chal have captivated readers and earned spots on Hindi bestseller lists. With an eye for interplay of politics and society, he has left a mark as a satirist, columnist, and public speaker. Naveen's rich professional journey spans roles in global organizations like Oxford University Press before dedicating himself to the craft of writing. Mr. Mrityunjay Sharma, an author, entrepreneur, and politician whose book, Broken Promises, Caste, Crime, and Politics in Bihar, is a current bestseller. An alumnus of BIT Mesra and XLRI Jamshedpur, he transitioned from corporate leadership to grassroots politics. A change maker, an educator, Mrityunjay's contribution spanned developmental initiatives and his impactful social initiatives, Kartavya Path. Moderating this enriching discussion is Mr. Nilakantan RS, an engineer by training and an author by passion. His book, South versus North, India's Great Divide, examines the complex layers of India's federal structure. A chief data scientist for one of India's largest fintech firms, Nilakantan RS's expertise lies in designing stable, decentralized systems, be political framework or business processes. So without further ado, I'm handing over this session to Mr. Nilakantan. And I must remind you, this session for the next 40 minutes will be immersing you in the political landscape of India. Over to you, Mr. Nilakantan.
Thank you. Pleasant Sunday morning, and always good to be in Nagpur, which is such a relief if you happen to live in Gurgaon as I do, right? So firstly, the topic is sufficiently vague that we can discuss basically anything under this, and therefore we are, and you have probably seen enough of electoral politics and sort of punditry related to that if you switch on television, and so we will try and stay above the fray if that's okay with you guys. Given that, I'm going to sort of set like a temperature of the room, so to speak, and ask my panelists, firstly, what do you make of the current political landscape? Well, firstly in this country, but also as it happens, around the world as you see it, and how do you think it has changed over the last, let's say, decade, especially since I would imagine the last decade for all over the world has been very important given the impact that the internet has had on politics. And so how do you see the last 10 years, and then how do you see the next 10 years going forward? So if you could sort of set the stage on that, we'll then go forward. Is that okay? Go ahead. We- You want this?
हेलो आप सबका स्वागत है। जो है नीलकांतन जी ने सवाल अंग्रेजी में पूछा है, मैं जवाब हिंदी में दूंगा, इसलिए कि मैं हिंदी में ज़्यादा कंफर्टेबल हूँ। लिखने में मैं अंग्रेजी में ज़्यादा कंफर्टेबल हूँ, सो आई विल स्पीक इन बोथ इंग्लिश एंड हिंदी। अगर किसी को कोई ऐसा है जिसको हिंदी समझने में दिक्कत हो तो आप मुझे बताइए, देन आई विल स्पीक इन इंग्लिश। देखिए,
Nobody else in the audience except me.
okay. See, the political landscape of India and the political landscape of the world, they have basically one thing in common. Now technology is the biggest ideology, and it's also called the post-ideological, world. विचारधारा जो है वो समाप्त हो चुकी है, टेक्नोलॉजी जो है वही नई विचारधारा है, फर्स्ट थिंग। सेकंड, because of the various factors, and because we followed the Western model of politics and the Western model of development, there has been a major identity crisis throughout the world. So now the politics of identity has emerged. तो जो एक आइडेंटिटी की पॉलिटिक्स है वो अब पूरी दुनिया में हो रही है। अभी आपने यूएस के इलेक्शन देखे, यू रिसेंटली विटनेस द यूएस इलेक्शन। सो इट वाज ऑल अबाउट, like in 20th century, it was all about globalization, going out, connecting more with the world. But now it is more about, coming back to your roots and protecting your own national interest. So it's kind of a reverse journey, and this reverse journey is happening because it's like a pendulum. When you go to one extreme, then you are bound to go to another extreme. So in globalization, in case of globalization, we had gone to one extreme. Globalization was considered to be a panacea. Globalization was considered to be a solution for all problems, but it did not happen. So now we are moving towards the another extreme. And I think this is how societies evolve. So, and going ahead over the next 10, 15 years, I think artificial intelligence and other technological innovations, so they are going to define basically, the politics of the world. They are going to change the way you are going to vote. It's going to change the way the political parties will be run. It will probably bring more transparency, but you also have threats like, earlier it was very difficult to build a false narrative. But today with artificial intelligence, you can easily build a false narrative within 24 to 36 hours, or probably even within few hours. We just witnessed it in Maharashtra elections when a video of Supriya Sule was going around in which she was allegedly talking about bitcoins. And she refuted it, but the damage had been done. A similar thing had been done in Lok Sabha elections, where the videos of some BJP leaders, especially the home ministers, with it was a fake video with artificial intelligence where they were seen as talking about that we will change the constitution. So these are the threats, and I want to leave our audiences with a thought. Why do you think Elon Musk spent almost $43 billion to buy X? It was not a very, commercially feasible proportion. And what role X has played in the US elections, and what role X is playing now in the political spectrum across the world. So it's going to be war of narratives as we go ahead. Technology is going to play the key role. The old structures are getting redundant. Those who do not adapt to the new technology, BJP has adapted to the new technology, so that's why it is doing very well in India. Congress has not been able to adapt the new technology. That is one of the key reasons that it is not doing well, and a lot of other political parties. So, and last but not the least, in US elections, And in Lok Sabha elections, Congress spent almost about, unofficially, about 8,000 crores on, social media. And they did very well in, as compared to the previous Lok Sabha elections. So technology is the key. It is a double-edged sword. No, it can do a lot of good also, but it can do, a lot of bad things also. This is how it is going to evolve.
Yeah, Naveen, go ahead.
Same point? Okay. So let me try to talk from audience perspective. How I got interested in politics. So I was studying in college and student organization. They came and said, "हमारे member बनोगे?" I said, "Oh, क्यों नहीं? मैंने उनसे पूछा, मेरी लड़ाई होगी तो आ जाओगे क्या?" They said, "Yes, हम आ जाएंगे." आया कभी कोई नहीं. But that was the first thing how I got introduced to student politics. And after that, many things happened in university, and I became part of it. I contested election. What I realized with the time, we actually grew up in a time when globalization was happening in India. Companies were coming, jobs were changing. Same time when I think I was 7, 8 years or 10 years old, when VP Singh was Prime Minister. So I have read news, किसी ने अपने आप को आग लगा दिया दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी में against reservation, whatever was proposed. So that was the kind of divide I have seen in my childhood. But we grew up कि नहीं caste कुछ नहीं होता, धर्म कुछ नहीं होता. But after 90, if you see, एक तरफ ग्लोबलाइजेशन की बात भी हुई है, एक तरफ कास्ट और धर्म की भी बात हुई है. Different political sides, they tried to build up their own narrative. 2004, Congress came back in power after everyone was thinking that Vajpayee ji will come back. And 14, we know what happened. अगर आप देखिए जो मिडिल क्लास है हमारे आपके जैसा, हमारे पास कोई पॉलिटिकल थॉट प्रोसेस नहीं है. हमारा थॉट प्रोसेस वही था जो मेरा कॉलेज में था. कह रहे यार कोई मेरे से लिए कुछ कर देगा क्या? दिस इज हाउ वी यूज्ड टू थिंक. The key point was not religion as everyone thinks. It was not Hinduism or it was not anything else. It was more of a development, the thought of development, how country is going to change. What urban middle class or even in a rural area, कौन गांव में रहना चाहता है? सब शहर में आ रहे हैं. Everyone want job. सबको पैसा चाहिए. That is what is building narrative. Who is going to give you jobs? Who is going to give you infrastructure? That is something जो basic चीज़ें हमारी missing थी. मैंने अपने साथ के लोगों को चेंज होते हुए देखा है जिनका ये मानना था कि ये सब पॉलिटिक्स सब बेकार होती है. एंड इन पास्ट 15-20 years, आई एम नॉट जस्ट टॉकिंग अबाउट लास्ट डिकेड विच यू आर सेइंग. लास्ट डिकेड वी हैव सीन people are becoming more polarized. They are talking more about it. But it actually started changing during 2000 के अराउंड. जो मेरा एज ग्रुप था, ये एज ग्रुप जब पावर में आने लगा है, जॉब्स करने लगा है, हमारा थॉट प्रोसेस चेंज होना शुरू हो गया. हमने ये देखा कि क्या हो रहा है, क्या हमें चाहिए. एक नैरेटिव हमें हमेशा बताता रहा. सो एक सेगमेंट को अगर हम कहें कि सोशल जस्टिस का एक पॉइंट उठा, सोशल जस्टिस के पॉइंट पे एक सेगमेंट को डेमोनाइज किया जाना शुरू किया गया. फिर नेशनलिज्म की बात हुई तो नेशनलिज्म के नाम पर एक धर्म को डेमोनाइज किया गया. तो ये सारी चीज़ें हो रही हैं. ऐसे में सोशल मीडिया आने के बाद हम सबके पास अपनी अपनी वॉइस थी. हम सब ने अपने अपने नैरेटिव को बिल्ड करना शुरू किया. व्हाट आई फील, इफ आई एम नॉट agreeing with any politician or any journalist, now I can say things. So this is how things started changing in past 10 years more aggressively. हो तो ये बहुत पहले क्या था, 8-9 के आसपास जब फेसबुक इंडिया में पॉपुलर हुआ, you will see everyone was trying to share their voice. But we say last decade because social media got that much popular. तो अब मुझे लगता है जो narrative की fight है, this is fake. जो चल रहा है वो तो चल ही रहा है. बट दिस नैरेटिव इज नाउ गोइंग टू बिल्ड बाय द ऑडियंस ऑल्सो. हरियाणा में वी वर टॉकिंग कि अरे अब आ जाएगी कांग्रेस वापस आ जाएगी. राजस्थान एवरीवन वाज सेइंग कि कांग्रेस में रिपीट, फर्स्ट टाइम इट इज गोइंग टू चेंज, कांग्रेस विल रिपीट. यू नो व्हाट हैपेंड. महाराष्ट्र एवरीवन वाज लाइक अरे अब तो इस बार तो बीजेपी साफ है. एंड यू नो व्हाट हैपेंड. सो हाउ पब्लिक इज थिंकिंग, अब उनको इस नैरेटिव से फर्क नहीं पड़ रहा. आपको जो करना है करते रहिए. एवरीवन इज थिंकिंग फ्रॉम देयर ऑन पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. मुझे एंड में क्या मिल रहा है, और मुझे लगता है कि एंड में पब्लिक को यही चाहिए. व्हाट आई एम गेटिंग आउट ऑफ दीज पॉलिटिशियंस. सो एवरीवन इज मेकिंग देयर नैरेटिव बाय देयर ऑन. दिस इज व्हाट आई फील.
So I think enough has been said, and I'll just try to see a broader change in politics if I had to discuss. So you'll have to go slightly into the past and see how we have evolved as a society, right? We used to have monarchies, and then for the first time US came up with a concept called democracy. I would not say US came up with that concept of democracy. At least it was the first formed nation state with a democracy. Democracy has been something which we as a country have had, in fact, 2,000 years ago. Vaishali is called the first republic of the world, right? Vaishali is in Bihar. And hence it was thought that democracy is an answer to the inefficiencies of monarchies. And if there has to be a nation state, it has to be in the form of a democracy. And then there was, other nation states started taking up democracy as an example. Democracies then started getting certain kind of resistance through a other side of the spectrum called communism, right? So certain countries said, democracies will not be able to decide the right leader because common man does not have that understanding of what is right for a nation. So let the state take the call, right? And state will then, divide the resources equally among everybody. So everybody will prosper, And the democracies that were there then were mostly capitalist democracies. So they said in capitalism only the, people who are the more capable ones or who already have the resources will win and will have more resources. So that's not fair. So let's make it more fair and, therein came the concept of communism. As an answer to this, and in the 1950s and 60s, there was entire Cold War going on, and there was entire conflict of, which side is going to be more efficient and more successful. By the 1990s, it became clearer that communism is not a very viable solution. While it looks very lucrative on the face of it, but there hasn't been one successful nation in terms of, we'll come to China later, there hasn't been one successful nation with communism as its core value. And it failed. Now as an answer to capitalism, certain other states started experimenting with a concept called socialism. So they said we'll be democracy, but will not allow private sector to take up the entire economic activities. The state has to be involved there. Right? There has to be a state intervention. So for example, the bigger industries, the minings, those kind of things will be state controlled at least, right? Again, that tussle is still going on, I would say, but by and far socialism has also taken a backseat. Even in India, you would say in 1960s and 70s, there was a huge wave of socialism which came in with the advent of Lohia and then Karpuri Thakur, and then came the entire breed of politicians like Mulayam Singh Yadav, Lalu Yadav and Nitish Kumar and so on. So I think it has been a change in making, and the world has been experimenting with different concepts. So if you see it in a very long term of the kind of civilization that we have, last 50, 70 years has been very tumultuous in terms of experimentation with political concepts. And broadly, we have been able to finalize that democracy is something that has its own inefficiencies, but still is broadly the answer to governing a nation state. You cannot move too far away from a democracy in the current scenario. No, that's a broadly established principle. We still keep debating, democracy has so many inefficiencies. The people who vote, they do not have the entire information, so they vote for the wrong candidates. And very often in India as well, we say, how can somebody vote for this person? He's a criminal. He has 50 criminal charges on him, right? That's the arguments, but then we have not been able to find a better solution, right? So that's still for there. Now, democracies have started become slightly more efficient with the advent of, as my other two panelists said, with the advent of technology. Now, the information has started reaching out more and more to people. Now, the larger the information dissemination, the better their decision-making will be. In fact, within democracies also, the institutions that are there across the world, even in Indian context, let's say, the processes have become better and better. So for example, the Election Commission, which takes care of the elections in India, for example, in the 1990s, a certain candidate, how many criminal charges he has or what's his educational qualification or anything, nobody even knew of that. Nobody even had seen the faces of the candidates that they were voting for. They would either vote for the symbols or the name of the person that he had distantly heard. But today, the candidate has to publish all the criminal charges that they are carrying in newspapers, on social media, they're discussed in the newsrooms, and that's the kind of transparency that has come. While you may still vote for that criminal politician, that's a separate thing altogether, but that transparency has come. Similarly, we have moved from ballot boxes to EVMs. And for people who have not seen the era of ballot boxes, and there is much controversy on the EVMs which get created often, but just realize that in the era of ballot boxes that we have seen, and in specific states in the Hindi heartland, the elections used to be so rigged, so rigged. The ballot boxes used to be so mistreated. You know, the entire ballot boxes used to be stolen. Ink used to be poured into the ballot boxes so that the votes get disqualified, right? Elections used to get reprimanded multiple times. In 1995 in Bihar, T.N. Session is a very, very famous chief election commissioner that India had, and he brought in a lot of electoral reforms. 1995, the Vidhan Sabha elections in Bihar was postponed 4 times. He had to call commandos from Punjab and central agencies just to get that election conducted. And in spite of that fact, there were large-scale riggings. There were at least 50 people who were killed during the election process. If you compare that with what we are undergoing now, the election process looks very, very fair. Today, there's no instance of a booth loot that comes ever in news. That's something of a heavenly world that nobody had even thought of 20 years ago. Are we taking questions as of now?
We'll take questions later.
So yes, so if I look in the larger context, I would say we have moved as a society. There still are inefficiencies. People will keep shuttling between ideologies, keep voting. But I think we have moved to a state where at least we are much better than what we were a few decades ago, and much, much better than what we were, let's say, centuries ago. Yeah.
So, both Mrityunjay and Arun, you raised very important points, right? And this is not something new. Like Aristotle, 2,400, 500, how many ever years ago that he lived, thought that, and this comes up in every single sort of freshman philosophy class that if you happen to sit in an American university, which is that, you know, the professor will get up on stage and say that Aristotle thought that elections of the kind that we are used to in terms of the popular mandate electing the person who is going to govern you, he thought it was an elitist idea. And the way in which, according to Aristotle, a better approach would be sortition, which is some version of a lottery. That is, you just pick the person at random and that you let that person govern. And, you know, this was his idea of what should be a just society, right? He thought elections were corrupt for the complicated reasons that Mrityunjay you've explained. And, you know, because, you know, as you said, the alternative of communism, the dictatorship of the proletariat never ends up staying the dictatorship of the proletariat, because such is this wonderful drug called power. You no longer remain proletariat once you happen to have power. So that being said, the question that I have for all three of you is precisely this, right? Like, if you happen to open a newspaper in the early outs, like the first century, the first decade of the 21st century, you'd see in my home state of Tamil Nadu, for instance, Jayalalitha was running her own experiment quite successfully, if I may add. Like, the results of that you see today in that, the infant mortality rate, the maternal mortality rate, the improvements in gross enrollment ratio, all of that is, Tamil Nadu is like sort of caught up and actually surpassed Kerala in some instances. So good for her. At the other end of the country, a certain Narendra Modi was running his own experiments in Gujarat, right? Like you can agree or disagree with either of these two chief ministers, but if you opened the op-ed pages in the 2000s, you would see that the most impactful job in politics in India at that time was the office of the chief minister, right? Whereas it seems to have changed quite significantly in the last 10 years with the idea of one nation, one fill in the blank, right? Now, as somebody who looks at it from the vantage point of, I grew up in Madras and seeing it through that, I sort of see this sort of, centralization of policy making as sort of the most important development in the last decade or so. And I see significant challenges. Well, for instance, we are in the state of Maharashtra, another very prosperous, relatively rich state. Now, what do these states do when there is a centralization of policy making? Should we go back to this era where chief ministers ran roughly their own experiments, or should we have a centralized policy making? And how does that, very importantly, affect the sort of career of politicians such as yourself, right? Because if you're in a state and if you're sort of restrained on what you can and cannot do, your political ambitions then end up, okay, let me go to Delhi, right? So what do you guys think of that?
See, I have a slightly different opinion on this. I think there is a very robust constitutional mechanism which ensures that the policy making doesn't get institutionalized. For example, you have a finance commission which basically gives recommendations about devolution of financial powers. Then time to time you have administrative reforms commission. Then you have interstate councils. Then you have a lot of bodies where the state chief ministers come, whether they belong to any political party. For example, if you take the example of GST Council, the Goods and Services Tax Council. So GST Council has all the chief representatives from all the states, and generally, if I remember correctly, at one point of time, the West Bengal finance minister used to head, and the West Bengal finance minister, who was a TMC minister, so he used to head the GST Council. So I think there is a very robust mechanism. Now, there are two kinds.
Can I interrupt you there?
Yeah.
So, again, it's one of my pet peeves, and that's why I'm interrupting you, right?
इसलिए मैं हिंदी में बोलना चाह रहा था. नहीं, please.
So take the GST Council, for instance. It's a classic case of a assault on federalism in my mind. And I'm curious what my friend has to say here, right? Which is the council itself, right? Like, what is the foundational idea behind the GST? It is that you want to sort of concentrate manufacturing efficiencies, so to speak, right? Like you live in the state of Maharashtra, for instance. Let's say you manufacture soap. Your neighboring state, let's say Madhya Pradesh, you don't want Madhya Pradesh to manufacture soap just because it has a little border here, and you want to, improve the efficiency of manufacturing by moving it to Maharashtra and manufacture more and more soap here at better and better scale and greater efficiency, so on and so forth, right? What does this mean? It means that there are fewer and fewer states which are quote-unquote manufacturing states, right? In India, there are essentially like four large manufacturing states: Maharashtra, Gujarat, Karnataka, and my home state of Tamil Nadu, right? Like these are the four sort of large manufacturing states. By design, what happens is there are fewer and fewer states which are essentially ending up as these manufacturing states. If you have a council wherein you have the manufacturing states in it, they will be fewer, and the market states, which is everybody else who is consuming what these states produce, is going to be much larger. And the interests of the manufacturing states and the consuming states are antithetical to each other by design and by nature, right? Like the seller wants to sell at more, the buyer wants to buy at less, right? Like that's basic economics. The problem here is that not only is this design sort of contravening to this idea of, may the best man win, in that the manufacturing states are now forced under the tyranny of the consuming states, it is that the center has a veto in this GST Council, right? So essentially, what's the center going to do? It is going to essentially side with the states where the maximum number of votes are, right? So it's countervailing the economic argument there. Anyway, that is my little rant.
No, you see, I would look at, we elect, our representatives, and they are going and they are sitting in the GST Council. And I haven't heard, too many complaints about and people, all of us basically, a lot of us pay GST. The taxation system has become much more smoother. Otherwise, I remember as a journalist when every second day we used to cover a story where, the excise team has raided a market, or, the sales tax team has raided a market and there is a shutdown in the market. Every second or third day, there used to be, the youngsters, they can ask, their parents. So one is that you have taken that draconian, taxation system where the Sarkari Babus were your Mai Babs. So that is one of the biggest achievements of this GST system, one. Second is that the state representatives are there. I think, if you look at ever since this GST has, and second thing is that Parliament, as in an electoral democracy, Parliament is supreme. Now the GST, all the provisions basically, they have been passed by the Parliament, and representatives from cutting across political parties have done it. I don't have right now the data points. to, and I don't want to unnecessarily counter your argument. But let's say that, okay, that there is a centralization. See, one fundamental problem which we have, because we think in the Western paradigm, is that we think in binaries, left and right, centralized and decentralized. So this is all a Western paradigm. These are all very subjective things. So what is looking today, very centralized, probably, 5 years down the line, you would look at it, probably very decentralized. So जिसे कहते हैं ना कि समय काल और परिस्थितियों के हिसाब से चीज़ें बदलती हैं, तो उनके संदर्भ वो होते हैं. तो मुझे ये लगता है कि overall, but I want to make a larger point on this thing and then leave some time for my other fellow panelists. See, the problem which we have is that whenever we discuss politics, in Hindi the synonym is Rajniti. Now, politics and Rajniti are altogether two different terms. And ये जो सारा confusion हो रहा है, politics is a word basically which has come from Aristotle's work. And it's basically about, about the people or about the communities. That is the meaning if you go into the etymology of the word politics. So it talks about communities. Rajniti is basically the policy of the state, Rajya ki niti. Okay, so these are, so actually when we are talking about, so I would say Rajniti is more like polity. And I think we need to focus less on politics, more on polity. One. Second is, when we talk about politics in a context of a popular terminology, जो सामान्य भाषा में, we are confining most of the time it to electoral politics. So there are multiple dimensions of this what you call politics, and I think politics is a sub-function of polity. It is time that if we really want to do some discussions where something concrete come out of it and it benefits the society or the nation, then it is better that we start shifting our focus from basically from electoral politics to politics and from politics to polity.
Yes, so your point was centralization or decentralization, what we were talking about. Have you ever thought why corporates are doing better? So what Arunji said, we see things in binary.
Are
this
they?
or that?
Because if you look at, again, this is another pet peeve of mine, and don't let me go into another rant. But the point I want to make is, people often think that corporations are more efficient. The answer is they're not. The point is that corporations have a relatively low threshold of failure. If a company winds up, yeah, sure, it affects some people and some consumers and some people who are employed there and shareholders, but it does not have the large-scale sort of chaos that a failure of a nation state has. And which is why if you go and look at the BSE Sensex, the 30 companies which were there in 1989, only 7 or 8 of them are still there in the BSE Sensex, right? Like, companies fail all the bloody time. But nation states better well not fail, because the chaos that it sows on ordinary people is just unimaginable, right?
Coming there. So how many companies failed and how many companies succeed? Why we would just want to see how many companies failed? We have so many companies which succeeded. Tata is one such example. Kab se chal raha hai? That is one. So the point which I want to make through the example of corporates, if you work with them, you will see there is a centralized policy for few things. There are some strategies which they follow in each and every office. Even in global organizations, they follow one strategy. And then you are allowed to customize things as per your requirement, your state. Now coming to one, I worked in Rajasthan during 2023 elections, and I noticed an interesting thing about Rajasthan. They started this thing, health insurance scheme. Center is also having a health insurance scheme. Now state want to introduce its own health insurance scheme. Issue kahan par aa raha hai? The point is, state government and central government, दोनों अलग पार्टी के हैं, they have to fight with each other. So everyone is trying to, like, इनका वाला policy ठीक नहीं, मेरा वाला ठीक है, so I will give you something else. But health, we four come from 4 different states. लेकिन health का issue तो common है ना? for everyone. So why there are not some sectors where you need one unified policy for the entire nation? It can be. And then you allow many things to customize. Yes.
May I disagree there? So health is a classic example, right? You cannot possibly have the same health policy for a state like my own, which is Tamil Nadu, or my neighboring state, which is Kerala, because these states have what is, health indices that are comparable to OECD countries. Take, states like Uttar Pradesh or Rajasthan, for instance. These states have health indices, and my book sort of lists them down. Please take a look at it. But these states have health indices that are comparable to sub-Saharan Africa. A classic case is Madhya Pradesh, which has an IMR of 48, which is comparable to Afghanistan. Kerala has an IMR which is better than the United States. There is nobody in this world who will argue that we can run both Afghanistan and the United States with the same health policy. Why is Kerala and Madhya Pradesh any different?
So I took example of health insurance, the policy, and I also mentioned that you have the right to customize. You should have right to customize. In Rajasthan, one part, when you are talking about Jaipur, the kind of diseases, the kind of diseases people suffer is different from what people suffer in Jodhpur. So you have the right to customize. If you want to give a policy, so there is a health insurance policy of 25 lakhs, let's say. Central ने एक policy बनाया, this is what every citizen of the country should get. And state is allowed to customize it for what kind of diseases. In Rajasthan, what initially happened, they included 7 or 10 diseases into that, और बहुत सारे diseases का part ही नहीं थे. Later they realized कि नहीं, this is something which need to be into part of it. So that is something which you need to work out as per the state, as per the area, that customization. But in terms of few policies, health is one example. Water is one such thing. Rajasthan, we are facing issue of water. Bihar में इतना पानी कि बाढ़ ही आ जाता है यार. That is entire different story. So that policy, one centralized policy, unified policy, and then you allow customization for the states. That is what I want to.
In fact, I would argue that the evidence that you have submitted exactly points to the opposite sort of path that we should take, because, and I'll tell you why. If you look at if a society has achieved relatively good sort of infant mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, basic nutrition, those kinds of things, the kinds of investment that it needs to make in health happen to be at relatively higher order care, like tertiary care, things of that nature, right? And therefore, the kinds of interventions that are required there, including establishment of tertiary care hospitals and things of that nature, and the amount of money that you give for those same insurance programs is very different, because I don't know, like there are a bunch of rich people here. Like I, for instance, have gout, which is like a pretty rich person's disease. Like none of us actually walk into a government hospital, right? Whereas the person who's having their child die of diarrhea, which is the biggest cause of IMR, right, requires establishment of PHCs, and the kind of insurance support that mother needs is extraordinarily different from the one that I need, or people in this panel have. And when there is such divergence, and its exact difference is the difference between the United States and Afghanistan. And if you, it doesn't matter how clever you are. If you sit in Delhi, it is mathematically impossible for you to arrive at either an insurance plan or a health policy for these two sets of divergent states. And the best thing that the government in Delhi can do is send the money back to these states and say, do whatever you want.
So budget allocation, what you are talking about, budget allocation, and that is the thing which I am talking about, the customization. When you have one policy, you have a budget, and that need to be distributed as per the requirement of the state. So that customization I am talking about, that you need to find out what is the issue in your state, and then in that policy, how that is going to fit. That is what was my point.
So I think there's not a right or a very correct answer to centralization versus decentralization. There'll never be an ideal answer, and there will always be debates. But what we should primarily look at is what kind of a nation state do we want to create? And there are two very different spectrums. One could be China, wherein every states are also governed by what their premier wants. So any central policy gets propagated to all the states exactly in the same manner as they want. At the other spectrum, maybe I would put US. US is more of a union of states. So the states more so take care of themselves. They have their own policies, they have their own laws. Even their criminal laws are different. Even their civil laws are different. So for example, and you would have heard of this controversy very recently, wherein various states in the US have various abortion laws. Some of the states allow that, some of the states do not allow that. But then the far bigger question is, then what are we standing as a nation state for? See, when we talk about a nation state is formed by a certain ideological principle of what said people broadly stand for. What is that common denominator between all its people? So for example, in India, I will say that the basic laws, which everybody gets governed by, the principles of the formation of the nation state should be same for all. So for example, when somebody commits a crime, let's say in my home state of Jharkhand versus your home state of Tamil Nadu, they should be punished in a similar manner. The punishment should not be different because we are governed by same kind of culture, principles, history, policies, and so on. Same in terms of, beneficial policies as well. So as an example, if I have to say in the world, I would say US gets too far away on the extreme wherein, it's just a cluster of states who are cooperating with each other, coordinating with each other, and then selecting a final president, but in reality running their own states. Vis-a-vis, what we had envisaged nation state to be was a cultural identity. We said, भारत सिर्फ एक जमीन का टुकड़ा नहीं है. आपने वाजपेयी जी का सुना होगा वो भाषण, right? We have a cultural integration, we have a history, we draw our principles from our scriptures, right? We still refer to Chanakya Niti, we still refer to Vedas, right? We still refer to Sahitas, saying these are the principles we are going to be governed by. So I think in those cases, and that's a wonderful job that our constitution does, which we call as the basic structure of the constitution, which the Supreme Court says it cannot be altered. The states cannot alter them, even the center cannot alter them, because that is the basic structure of the constitution. So for example, our fundamental rights cannot be altered by the legislature. Nobody can alter that. Yeah. So for those principles, I think it does a wonderful job of defining that these are some of the unbreachable principles and these will uniformly apply to every person in the country. But when it comes to welfare policies, and I very rightly agree to what you said, those have to be customized according to the present day conditions of the state, because the conditions of the state also keep changing. While we are quoting, let's say, the example of the disparity between northern state and southern state in terms of their health indicators, it wasn't so, let's say, 50 years ago. And then it would have needed certain different policies. Now it would need certain different policies. 50 years later, it would need certain different policies, right? So in those cases also, I think broadly our federal mechanism does a good job. I would not say the best job, but a good job. Because again, there's a finance commission, which Sir mentioned, which does a wonderful job of, let's say, at least recommending what is the kind of devolution that goes out to the states. And in fact, one good thing, in fact, we were talking about GST and all. So one good thing that the Modi government did when it came to power after 2014 is said, will increase the devolution of the funds to the states from 32% to 42%. So now, 42% of the funds that the entire center collects gets devolved to the states. So it gives them a slightly larger bandwidth to devise their own policies and spend on those welfare policies. You have a question?
I have a rant.
Please go ahead.
So, two things. One is the 15th Finance Commission, which did which did increase the allocation from 32 to 42. Sort of precedes the Modi administration, and the government actually did not want to do it, but went ahead with it anyway. But be that as it may, the sort of criticism that I have here is that, and this is not a sort of partisan criticism, right? Like regardless of who was in power, they would have done the same, which is that what the union government does, and if you go and see what they have as central flagship programs, right? By virtue of adding more, increasing the allocation, what it has done is the union government has sort of tied the state's contribution to the flagship programs and has increased that, right? So essentially what this increase of 10 percentage points in the Finance Commission's allocation ratio has ended up doing is that it has saddled states with policies that people of that state, through the government that they elected, did not choose for, but some bureaucrat in Delhi decided. And that is the essential problem there, right? So and this again goes to a different rant, which is that, if you have the union government spending on what are essentially state subjects of some kind, you are going to end up with this chaotic idea where you treat elected state governments of states which, for instance, this state of Maharashtra is probably, it would be the 7th or 8th biggest country if it were a country by itself, right? Like, it is such a large state. Now, if you treat the government that people of the state elect as a glorified bureaucracy, which essentially follows what, policy that has been set in Delhi follow, you're in some trouble.
Again, there's no perfect answer to this. So, while you're saying that there's a disparity between various states in terms of the kind of development that they have had, and their needs are different, there would be certain basic denominators that will be similar across the country, if not the same. So, for example, let's say a PM Awas Yojana that is targeted at people who do not have a pakka ghar to live in. It's targeted at helping people get that house. So, for example, I would agree that Kerala may need lesser of those houses than Uttar Pradesh. And hence, it is tied as a central scheme wherein they say we'll devolve 60% of the funds and 40% you contribute. And there's no compulsion on the part of the state government that they have to, get those.
Can I tell you this? So I'm sorry to intervene again, but let's assume you were the chief minister of either Maharashtra or Kerala, right? And good for you, go ahead, be that. But no chief minister of Kerala, for instance, is going to sort of voluntarily say, I stand on principle and therefore I'm going to give up this enormous amounts of funds from Delhi, right? They are practical people at the end of the day, right? So nobody stands on principle when the thing that is on the other side is a whole bunch of money.
And hence I'm saying, so see, most of the schemes that you see coming from the central governments are most of the schemes which target the very basics of, you would say, livelihoods. So for example, PM Awas for housing, a Jal Jeevan Mission which has a target of having tap water reaching every household in the country. Again, the numbers may vary across states, but that's a need that across India, there is a need for that. For example, Manrega as a concept. Again, I would argue, let's say lesser people in Kerala would require, to go out in the field and work, and they would, need daily wage work. More people in Uttar Pradesh may have. But again, that solves the problem of people who would want to work daily and earn a wage in lieu of that. So I'm saying at least the basics, and that's what, as a nation state, the central government has to identify at least the common denominator problems that may exist in various states in varying proportions, and then devise policies according to that. So for example, Ayushman also, we were talking about health. I'm saying Ayushman is a policy, while let's say certain states may have better secondary and tertiary care as well, but as a policy it is helping at least those who need that. So it is at least coming to the fore of people who do not have the money to spend, and it is helping them with those 5 lakh rupees when in dire need. So I think at least in those basic denominator principles, the central government should play a role.
Do we have more time for discussion, or do we open it to questions? Because I have a burning thing that I want to raise with the panelists, but I guess we will go to questions. But before that burning thing that I wanted to ask, which I'm going to ask you to ask on my behalf, is delimitation. Go. Can I ask you to do this? Can you address the question to a specific member of the panel? It'll be. Thank you.
There are certain challenges to the democratic structure right now in India and even in the globe. One, as we have discussed, the very idea of centralization. Conceptually, we need to understand that democracy is antithetical to centralization. And therefore, whenever we are talking about centralization, we need to negotiate the fine line between what is the democratic principle of decentralization and where to be centralized. Second,
Can we stick to only one question, because we really don't have the time for now.
I will come to the point of populism. Atul Kohli wrote this article
Do you guys want to take that?
देखिए मैं ना शब्द बड़े भारी भरकम थे, मैं सवाल ज़्यादा समझ नहीं पाया हूँ. हाँ, हिंदी में बोल दीजिए आप. एक लाइन में बोलिए.
Can I translate your question into a more provocative question? The question that he's asking is 1.4 billion a reasonable unit of democracy?
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable unit of democracy, and I also want to come back to, see, if you read from Article 245 to Article 266 or 267, there is, that is one of the core or the soul of the Indian Constitution when it comes to federalism and the center-state relations. The only problem is that sometimes when there are strong charismatic leaders, they are able to implement these articles or in letter as well as in spirit. But when we have weak politicians as chief ministers, or when we have weak governments, so then they are not able to implement that. So that's how federalism gets affected. So it has less to do with the policy framework. It has more to do with the individuals. We have seen also that when we have charismatic individuals at the center also, so it's bound, it happens everywhere. It's the way politics is, it's the character of the politics. ये सत्ता का चरित्र है. It's the character of the power. कि जो charismatic होगा, ठीक है ना, जो है वो dominate करेगा उसको scene को जो है, उसके फायदे भी होते हैं, उसके नुकसान भी होते हैं. You can't help it. This is the character of the politics, the way we do politics और जिस तरीके से सरकारें बनती हैं. सर आपका समय समाप्त. हम बाद में बात करेंगे चाय पर.
Can I just add one more thing, Arun, and I'd like the others to answer that, which is that a society that actually chooses charismatic politicians, children, quiet. A society that chooses charismatic politicians, I would argue, is a backward society, right? Do you know who the Prime Minister of Finland is? Do you know who the Prime Minister of New Zealand, or, well, New Zealand probably, but Norway or, the Netherlands are? No, because they've, and famously Belgium did not even have a government for 3 years. And the reason, but those are very well-functioning societies. And the reason is that, their politics, or polity, as you say, has evolved to such an extent that they've essentially taken out the quirks of the individual whom they're electing and instead are voting for, what they want as policy. And, I do hope, this society progresses to that, wherein we do not care whom we elect.
Just one...
Sir, before stating, I would just request you to conclude very fast, because the other speakers are also waiting outside.
Okay. So just to answer a part of the question that you had asked, so as a constitutional mechanism, the entire concept of Rajya Sabha was for this purpose itself, that the federalism part or the voice of the states would be heard in our parliament. And hence it was said that even all, constitutional amendments, they have to be passed through Rajya Sabha as well, finance bills, right? So somehow, so I do not want to comment on the, let's say, the efficiency of the Rajya Sabha to have played that role, but I would say if that role is well played efficiently by the Rajya Sabha, that balance would come. Now coming to your question, sorry, you said something, I forgot.
About the charisma of individuals.
Charismatic, yeah. Yeah.
एक लाइन में, क्योंकि समय कम है, ठीक है ना. मृत्युंजय जी, हम लोग जो है, मैं समझ सकता, मृत्युंजय जी और हम लोग वैचारिक स्तर पर एक ही तरीके से सोचते हैं, तो मैं I am giving a voice to, see, in a country of 1.4 billion people, you need to have charismatic politicians, and charismatic politicians are a necessity, क्योंकि जितना समय चुनाव के लिए मिलता है, 30-30 लाख की कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंसी होती है, 542 कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंसीज हैं, कोई भी जो है वो यहाँ पर जो चुनाव जो है वो करिश्मा के आधार पर ही हो सकता है. और पूरी दुनिया में कैरिस्मेटिक लीडर होते हैं, वो एक्सेप्शंस होते हैं. समय समय पर आते हैं। जैसे नरेंद्र मोदी कैरिस्मेटिक लीडर हैं, उनकी से आप सहमत हो असहमत हो, तो वो काफ़ी सालों के बाद आए हैं, उससे पहले इंदिरा गांधी थी। इसी तरीके से यूएस में यू हैड कैनेडी जो है हु वाज अ कैरिस्मेटिक पॉलिटिशियन, इन यूके यू हैड विंस्टन चर्चिल एंड देन मार्गरेट थैचर। तो ये एक फिनोमिना ग्लोबल है, वर्ल्ड वाइड है, और मुझे लगता है कि हिंदुस्तान के अंदर तो ये बहुत ज़रूरी है बिकॉज ऑफ द स्केल ऑफ पॉपुलेशन।
All right.
थैंक यू।
The speakers have for the next session are here. We should get. You should.
So, at the end, we thank all the speakers and the beautiful moderator over here for giving this immersive experience to everybody about political shift and public sentiment. Thank you very much.